Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Jenelle Riley, Deputy Awards and Features Editor at Variety. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome from the series Roar, actors Alison Brie and Betty Gilpin, and casting directors David Rubin and Richard Hicks. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Delighted.
Congratulations on a great series. Usually with an anthology, you get a little nervous. There's like a couple okay ones and then those ones you sort of dread. But this is really, they're all great episodes. Whenever we have people as accomplished as you are, I actually love to go back to the beginning and ask, what was your first job in this business? Did you start as like a production assistant? What was the first thing you cast? Or the first time you felt you could call yourself an actor? And let's start with Betty.
Oh gosh, my first job. I remember that a woman hired me to be, she was like, oh, you're an actress. I'm doing a photo project with my dead mother's dress. I'm having different actresses wear this dress and I take their picture in the dress. And I went to the Upper East Side to her dead mother's apartment. I put on her dead mother's dress, and this woman in her 50s crouched down like to the height of a little girl, and she was taking pictures and she was like, okay, now yell at me and just go for it.
Wow.
It was I haven't thought of that in 20 years. That was a long time ago. But yeah, that was my first acting job, and I really went for it and I let her have it, and I have to say it was an incredible performance that was only caught with still photographs
Acting
that are out there somewhere.
Yeah.
I got paid $100.
Wow.
Yeah.
Allison, what about for you?
Well, it's different than Betty.
Thank goodness.
I think that my first television, job in the film and television world was actually where I got my SAG card. It was a commercial. It was an anti-drug PSA, and I had no dialogue, but I feel like there was a situation where I didn't get paid and I got my SAG card instead. And I played pregnant teen in bathroom. And this was right after high school, right before college. So I was probably 18, and I just sat on a bathtub and stared at a pregnancy test and cried. And then later that year, when I was in college, the PSA would play, and I remember my college friends being like, I saw you in that anti-pregnancy commercial. And I was like, no, it's about drugs. The story was a silent story you didn't follow, which is that she did drugs, and that's why she was pregnant, and so she wasn't happy about it. The drugs.
Sounds like a great role.
I think it was a little confusing. It was. I actually don't think I cried in my audition. I just looked very distraught, and I will never forget, because it was my first job and I was in the trailer and they were doing my makeup, and the director came in and was like, she's going to be crying a lot, so let's make sure it's waterproof mascara. And I was like, am I? Great.
Sure, no problem.
Cry.
I swear I feel like I've seen that PSA. It feels very familiar to me. Or maybe that could be any PSA.
It was the vibe of PSAs at that time. The early aughts.
David, what about for you?
My first job was in New York. I was an NBC page at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And that fortunately didn't last too long, although I did wear a blue, fiberglass, it felt, blazer with an N on it. But shortly after that, because I was also an usher on Saturday Night Live, and I got to know that crew, that my first real job was on the production staff of SNL, and specifically on Weekend Update. So the intensity of that work was really the end of each week, because we were obviously spoofing the news stories of the day. And part of my job was to run around Manhattan to the various wire services, AP, UPI, Reuters, that provided the photos that were on Weekend Update. because this was right after the Paleolithic era, where there were no faxes and no faxes. Forget email. There were no faxes. Mm-hmm. And so I would have to deliver the photos to the NBC photo department. And the joy of it was that most of my time was spent with Gilda Radner and Alan Zweibel, who wrote all of Gilda's stuff on Weekend Update. The host of Weekend Update also will date me to the Paleolithic era, were Bill Murray and Jane Curtin. And I was in Gilda's dressing room, where she would improvise and revise the scripts for all the characters that she did on SNL. So it was, an insane moment for Saturday Night Live, and an incredible growth moment for me.
That's amazing. I feel bad Richard now has to top that.
I can't top it. Mine has to do with...
Go with the dead woman's dress. It works every time.
Right. Let's see. My first job, before I was in casting, I was an actor, and I went to RADA in the UK and couldn't get a work permit, so I had to come back. And so I was in Dayton, Ohio, furious, trying to figure out what to do. And I'd stolen some RADA stationery, so I typed up little letters to all the regional theaters in the country and said, I will come to you and audition at a general if you'll let me. And I think because it was an odd request or something, like a few of them said yes. So I went to Center Stage and said different ones. And I got a call when I was sitting at my breakfast table, would you come audition for the Guthrie, which is this theater in Minneapolis? And I got on People's Express, and I went and I did my 2 pieces, and I got 3 years out of it. And that kind of started me off.
That's amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Well, obviously, we're here today to talk about Roar, which is based on the short story collection by Cecilia Ahern, but brought to life on screen by Liz Flahive and Carly Mensch. Features fantastic actors from episode to episode. I'd love to start at the beginning with David and Richard. How did you sort of first become aware of the series, and what interested you in being a part of it?
It started with a relationship that I have had for many years with Bruna Papandrea, and her company, which is now called Made Up Stories. Bruna and I knew each other when I spent about 6 years as a producer with Sidney Pollack and Anthony Minghella company, Mirage. And Bruna ran our London office at the time. So we've been friends for, decades. And I'd worked on a number of films with her. So she told me about this collection of stories. And Richard and I also have a long history together, and we've partnered on many, many films, including Lars and the Real Girl and Hairspray. And we've had lots of adventures together, and we joined forces on this one. It was a unique experience because it's literally like casting a mini movie 8 times over. And such different tones and senses of humor and the level of sort of darkness, but also I think illumination in terms of the way women are perceived and the way women are empowered. It felt like it was both lots of wonderful stories to tell, but also something sort of timely in the way it presents its women in the most unusual circumstances.
Richard, for you?
When David asked me to partner up with him on it, and when I met Liz and Carly, and I was like, oh, you do theater and you are Ars Nova people, you're my kind of people. So I kind of got their vibe, and I like how angry they are, and I feel like that doesn't have a place in Hollywood. Doesn't quite know what to do with that feeling in women, I think, and the fact that they're owning it. Yeah, I find it really awesome and something I'm eager to support.
Not only do they not know what to do with it, they always seem surprised when it does so well.
Right. Oh, look, a true emotion. Oh,
look.
There's
an audience for this. What do you know? Yeah. Well, Allison and Betty, obviously you previously worked with Liz and Carly on Glow. Is this a matter where if, whatever they ask, it's an immediate yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I figured as much.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that building on what Richard said, I their anger and the way that it's the way that they funnel it, or not filter it, but sort of alchemize it into something so strange. It's like quirky anger or strange anger or theater of the absurd anger. Like it is, I knew Liz and Carly for a decade before Glow in New York as playwrights. And when they were writing weird little plays that, you know, a couple hundred people saw. And I think that they've kept that sense of a certain kind of weird that you're only used to seeing on a stage. And, you know, with Glow, they were able to sort of pair it with wrestling, which is its own kind of weird theater. And with Roar, I think it's such a perfect fit for them. It really reminded me of the plays that we studied at Fordham, where we were like, what are we doing, wasting our money, you know, hunching our backs and bulging our eyes and playing these characters in theater of the absurd that we'll never play as actors professionally. And then, I don't know, Roar seemed like Beckett feminism.
Down with that.
In the strangest way.
I love that. I might steal that term, actually, Beckett feminism.
Finally.
I can't go on. I must go on.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your specific episodes, actually, because Allison, you play a ghost, essentially, in The Woman Who Solved Her Own Murder. What interested you in the role of Rebecca, and what were the challenges of, for so much of it, you really don't have anyone to bounce things off of. You're there with the cast, but you're, you know, it's a great metaphor for a woman being unseen and unheard, but she's literally unseen and unheard.
Yeah. Well, as you said, it certainly was the case where, you know, I get a call from Liz and Carly describing what the show is and that there's a role for me. And I would have said yes to anything. But what was cool about this episode, I think, is also then they led me to, you know, I love research and they love research and they're so specific. They write with such specificity. And these episodes, I mean, I only got to read my own, but it's like it's about there's so many layers to it. There's the thing on the surface that's snappy and exciting and I'm a ghost. And then there are layers about women being, you know, not being seen and heard. And then there are layers about incel culture and how that is I don't know, seems to be growing and growing under the surface. It's like a real terrifying community that they sent me articles about. They also led me to a book called Dead Girls about the history of this trope from detective novels to detective TV shows about the symbolism of the dead girl and what she represents and how often she really is just used as a sounding board for male detectives, the inner workings of their own minds and emotions. And yet there's such a fixture in this genre. So there were so many elements about it that were exciting to me. It was fun to delve into all of those things and to talk with them on a script level about the different tactics that Becky, the character, would try to use to communicate with people around her. And it was strange to shoot because definitely everyone just ignored me the whole time. And in some ways, it was like a theater workshop where we had to also kind of figure it out. Like, how are the guys going to pause and find like weird mimes to do while I'm saying my dialogue? And ultimately, we ended up just all talking at the same time pretty constantly. So it was great fuel for me as an actress, literally trying to talk over these actors as they were saying their dialogue. And it was really fun. But I was talking to a friend after we shot it and she was like, she got good chemistry with the actors. And I was like, well, it's hard to tell because I'm a ghost. So everyone just had to ignore me the whole time. People walking by us and we're like, I'm so LA. I couldn't tell if I had good chemistry with my co-stars because, you know, my character's a ghost.
Well, there is a little Glow reunion with you and Christopher Lowell, but you don't get to speak to each other.
We had great chemistry on set.
Yeah. I would.
I'll admit it.
Betty, you star in The Woman Who Was Kept on a Shelf, which, I mean, takes the idea of a trophy wife to new literal levels. What was it about the character of Amelia that intrigued you?
I mean, it felt so just baldly on the page what Liz and Carly and I have talked about for forever, years and years. That, you know, I mean, I think about it in my own life that I have gotten to a place in my career that feels very exciting, but it also, you know, I worry how much of that has to do with my shelf qualities, like the smoke and mirrors of it. And, you know, I kind of have to wear the dress to wear the pants. Like all the things that are alpha and empowered in my life also are because I have on fake eyelashes and contour and tailored costumes. And how much of it is the churning Liz Flahive and Carly Mensch anger, and how much of it is the shiny, you know, fake curated shell. And I think that is something that, you know, I think that the generation coming up behind us have much clearer ideas about. And I, as a 35-year-old, even though I consider myself very empowered and a feminist and serve my anger on a plate, I think that there's still a gray area in my mind of, you know, where does my worth come from? And when all of this goes away, which it will any second, you know, the shelf qualities, like where does that leave me? And I think that this episode really tackles that. And, you know, I think that my character, Amelia, her husband is offering her this very tempting lifestyle of leave it all behind, sit on the shelf, pose, read magazines, be adored. And I think that's a real, it's the Turkish delight of our generation of like, if you could go down this way toward a murkier, empowered self that's going to be harder to get to. And there's not a ton of examples because the world is changing. So what does that look like for you? Or you could just stop right here and get as many compliments as possible and throw a filter on and just try to have the person in front of you say, I love you and I worship you, which feels like power, but of course it's not. We're a slave to the shelf. Anyway, it's something that Liz and Carly and I have talked about for years. So it felt super meta and kismet to do this episode all together. And, you know, it was bonkers fun, ridiculous. I mean, just ridiculous.
I mean, you get to do a song and dance number. Who gets to say that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Insane.
I will say I watched it with a small group of people, and I think most people have watched it by now. If not, brief spoiler. When she gets on the shelf at the end, there were so many screams in the house. They're like,
it's
no,
so sad. I know.
It's sad, but it's understandable.
Yes. Yeah. You can't escape the shelf.
There are so many amazing roles across the episodes. And obviously, in addition to the great actors we have here, you have people like Nicole Kidman and Cynthia Erivo. Richard and David, I'm curious where you even began when you thought of casting actors in roles. Like, did you know exactly who you wanted to put where? Or were there ever times where maybe you thought of someone for two different parts, or maybe they ever had a say?
There absolutely was that. I mean, and Nicole, who's also one of the producers of the series, with her producing partner, Per Sari, did do a little bit of jumping around, to be honest. I mean, there were moments where, you know, she thought this role might be the one, and then we were also dealing with COVID and the fact that she was going to be in Australia because she had just finished shooting 9 Perfect Strangers. I think this is how it went, and she was there already, and then it made sense for her to do The Woman Who Ate Photographs. But prior to that, she was attached to a variety of those episodes. Hopefully, not giving away too much. But also, you know, talking about what's the most effective way. This is the conversation about casting always, to spin a story, to make it less of the expected, to take what's there on the page and somehow surprise even the writers of what it could be. So, you know, those.
Yeah. So like one thing we did, I remember, is like we made a list of our favorite actresses in a way and tried to figure out like, okay, who do you put where to maximize the impact of each story.
And also the tone of the humor of it was so specific and unique, and the kind of thing that not everybody, even the most equipped, talented actors
No.
couldn't slot into. So you always had to sort of find the ones that we suspected had the ability to hit the rhythms, the unique rhythms of that particular story. It's a great conversation to have with creative partners, like Liz and Carly. Really wonderful, stimulating. And also we found out very early on how congruent our tastes were. Really in terms of supporting players, going away from the cosmetic and the sort of idealized things, and go for real people's faces and unusual voices and
real actors.
There was a lot of congruence, I think, in those conversations.
I didn't even think about logistics, but now that you mention it, I realize that the second episode is all Australians. It's Nicole Kidman and Judy Davis and Simon Baker, and now I'm finally putting that together.
Yeah, that was a logistical decision. I mean, there was at some point a version of that happening in Los Angeles, but it ended up being that way. And to get Judy Davis on the screen was already
come on,
feather in everybody's cap. Fantastic.
What was the most challenging role to cast for whatever reason? It could be logistical. It could just be, it could be everything from like a 2-line part. Sometimes those are the hardest ones to find. Allison's laughing. She knows something.
No, I'm like, ooh, spill it.
I don't know. One of the role that comes to mind first is Griffin Matthews, who played Issa Rae's assistant. There's something in the modernism of the way that they two talk to each other that isn't old school. That is something next step, and it took a lot of auditions for us to get the tone right, I would say.
Yeah, and we had an opportunity to cast 2 lesser known young actresses in the girls in the Woman Who Loved Horses or the Girl Who Loved Horses, and Fievel Stewart, who was a new face to us, was instantly compelling to watch, along with Cara Hayward, whom we knew from Moonrise Kingdom, but that was many years prior. So to sort of rediscover her in this context was also really interesting. Also because we wanted to thread this needle of having it be a Western, but have it also feel contemporary. And that was an interesting challenge, so that we weren't sort of falling for the typical tropes, and to find young actresses who could also ride horses that could thread that needle of both contemporary and archetypal.
But it also allowed us kind of an opportunity to do what I like to do anyway, is see the world as much as you can have time to, and then declare that after all the searching, here's what we offer up as we think the best possibility. So you can look the producer in the eye and go, we think this is it. We think this is it.
How easy or difficult was it to get great male actors to play supporting roles to women in all of these episodes?
There was the occasional challenge.
Yes, it was the occasional challenge. I think because it's one episode, it was lessened. But yes, Bruna and we talked about that of sometimes you run into it where men who are used to being in the power seat don't want to play second fiddle to a woman, or even if they don't really understand, don't really know that about themselves. It's a disinclination that I think is societal.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And that you have to get people who are cool enough to let that go.
I was so curious about that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's trippy. It's interesting.
I want to ask the actors, because there are obviously such important themes in the stories, and they're handled so well. I mean, just in Allison's episode, you're dealing with violence against women, but there's also, this great humor throughout it. And really, it doesn't surprise me, because Liz and Carly are an expert at balancing tones. But how do you balance that on set? Is it all in the script? Do you sort of find it in the moment? It just walks such a fine line.
I think it's a little bit of both. It definitely is their writing. And I'm glad that you brought up the humor, because I do think that was a big draw of the show for me too, and something that does make it so interesting. And it's another great talent that Liz and Carly have, which is being their own Mary Poppins, where they're going to like feed you some feminist truths, but they're going to do it with a spoonful of sugar and make it really fun to watch. And yeah, I think even reading my episode, I had to I was like, I don't know if I understand the tone. I think I do. I'm just going to do something crazy when I get on set and we'll see. But once I had my spray tan and makeup on, I was like, my instincts are tracking well. But I think they write with so much truth. And as I said before, such specificity and nuance. So like, I've always found that it's not difficult. Like all the same truth that you find in drama is there equally, if not more so, in comedy. And it's all about getting to the truth of that character in the moment. And I think it's nice to play with these themes and watch a character the way that a real human being is not in a constant state of sorrow, but maybe also laughs a little bit at the absurdity of the things that are happening in their own life or death if you're a ghost. So yeah, I think it was really fun, I think it's the pleasure of working with people that you feel so comfortable with too, that I felt very empowered on set to come in and take big swings, and I know that they would pull me back if I was going the wrong direction. And because everyone felt so comfortable, it was actually quite intuitive, I think.
And Allie's episode, I had never seen a send up like that of this genre that seems so canon and untouchable, of like the true detective, salty, dusty, sexy male detectives who are investigating women who had horrific things done to them. And the story is like about that character, but not at all. You never hear from her. It's just about the guys talking about like how they hate their fathers and hate Christmas. And I feel like that episode was so Liz and Carly, like publishing the things that they yelled at the TV when watching those things. And I don't know. So Allie's so brilliant in the episode of really giving that, I think that it's also easy in that genre of TV and film to sort of have the female character be a caricature of, the murdered sex worker or the murdered, these side characters, or in my case, the trophy wife. You're so used to seeing a portrayal of them that has judgment all over it. And I think Liz and Carly's writing is so not judgmental of these women. And Allie's performance is just so deep and real that you can't help but realize, oh, I guess I, as an audience member, wrote off those characters in True Detective and the things that are being sent up. I didn't even think of that character as a real person. I was thinking about Woody Harrelson's childhood. Yeah, right. His character.
Well, or it's the creative. It's like, because also that character, Becky, we've never seen her in one of those shows. As Betty's saying, the victims are the Madonna or the whore. They either have like a dark past and you didn't know that they were secretly a prostitute, or they are the untouchable virgin child, and it's, I think, part of the whole point too. And the way that Liz and Carly were having their fun was saying, well, what if she likes to wear a lot of makeup? She likes, she likes feeling sexy in front of men. She's going to try to flirt with these detectives. And just because she does it doesn't mean that her life is any less valuable. Like, what if the character herself is kind of basic? She's not a mysterious woman. That's okay. Those women's lives have value also. Yeah. Maybe we're all a little bit like that.
We are obviously have so many actors watching us. I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to ask the casting directors if there's any advice you have for actors coming into that room, things you like, things you don't like, things you would just want them to know. And actually, I would love to hear from the actors too, what you found has worked for you in the audition room.
I'll first of all, I so look forward to actually saying that word, come into the room, because that to me is where so much of the work really does happen. And I would praise all actors for having perfected the self-tape, throughout the pandemic, and to find ways of making that work, and to make clear choices based on very little information, without the ability then to have a conversation with us, the casting directors, about adjustments that can be made, about what the tone really is, about, that kind of a collaboration and trying to get the best version of an admittedly imperfect process, the audition. But once we do get people into the room, my piece of advice is always to not psych yourself out in that waiting room, because I think so often people are spending way too much time, even in their prep, of trying to psych what the filmmakers are looking for, what it is that they're looking for. And then you walk into the waiting room and you see somebody sitting in a chair and you go, oh, that's how I see it. That's probably what they're looking for. And you're constantly, you're immediately sort of defeating your own ownership of what you've decided on choice wise. And the truth is the only thing that an actor can deliver that no one else can in that audition is themselves in the part. So not to pander to the thing that you think the casting director or the director or the producers are looking for, but you in the part. And if it doesn't click, and if it doesn't actually even inspire them to try a different way and to cast you in that part, the authenticity of what you bring, which is you in the part, will linger. So, I always feel like there's a lot of sort of self-defeating doubt when you really just embrace the thing that you're bringing into the room, which is you.
It's good. Mine's similar. I would say, like actors, it's really hard to be an actor because most of the time it feels like you don't have any power. And it looks like the power is in the casting person or in the production or in the studio or the network or whatever it is. But I have a theory that none of this would exist if people around the world weren't willing to pay money to feel the emotions that the transparent actor is embodying. And so if you are able to tap into something that moves you more than your want to get this job, of course everybody wants to get the job, but if you find something in what you're going to do that is funny, that you find revealing, that is hurt, that moves you, then, and you're living in that world, that's the world to live in, because you have to invest completely and then let it go completely. And if it hurts to invest completely and not get the job. So a lot of actors, I think, become defensive or they become a little wackadoo. But if you can really love it and then really let it go, you're ahead of the game. So stay in what you love about whatever it is you're doing. And don't think about the rest of the hooey, which you can't control.
I have to say, I love you guys both for what you said. It's great advice. And it just reinforces what I was going to say, which is why I really like it.
Good. Yeah. Well, that was the reason we said it.
Thanks for sending that email earlier so that we knew.
Yeah, it's terrific. Really easy transitions.
But I'm glad it all makes sense. But I was going to say that for me, especially when I was younger auditioning, I remember a real switch and it speaks to what both David and Richard said, is that when I was going into the room trying to do what I thought they were looking for, there was a disconnect in me because I was going, I hope, and I think people can feel any kind of desperation as well. And it's just inauthentic, right? If you're sort of like, well, I think they want this. And once I changed my mindset, I started to think about it as my performance time. I would be like, well, I may only get to play this role for 2 minutes in this room. So this is and I have a captive audience. So this is my performance, my one night only show of this scene, of this character. And it made a big difference because I think it was both of what you're saying, like to what Richard's saying. I was like, here's my chance to play this part and let me inhabit it fully. And also at the same time, just coming in with my choices made. This is my take on it. And then, of course, I think important to have a good flexibility in the room and not be afraid to ask a question if you don't understand. You're in the room and they go, great, let's do it again. But could you infuse it with this? And sometimes you don't get, early on, you're just like, yep, let's do it again right away. And I think it's maybe not a mistake to say, absolutely. And by infuse it with X, do you mean why?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, let me try. And in that way too, I think there's a confidence in sort of owning the room and owning the time that you have to give that performance. Yeah.
It's really infuriating how much of, even, on a set, how much just being comfortable and relaxed gets you. Like it's 80% of it. And it's so annoying because you can't think about making yourself comfortable and relaxed. You'll get even more worked up and uncomfortable. But yeah, I remember right out of theater school, I don't know if I was overtrained, but I was in such an actor place that like I would audition for a lawyer or a teacher. I'd just be an actor. I would be like speaking the words and playing the character. It's like no one would believe me as like grocery store woman number 3. Like I just had actor all over me. And I felt like I had ability, but I was losing parts to people who were just better at going in and being relaxed and inherently themselves. And not that you're playing yourself, but just relaxed in your body and who you are. And I remember getting so mad and bitter that like, oh, she just has cooler rings and cooler hair than me. And like probably told a story about her dumb, cool ring. And that's what got her the part. And I could play Hamlet, but she, I just was so intense and so, once I learned to relax and let go, I think, honestly, the self-tapes help me because I think the idea that I have to win over the room and then I get to do the part that I love always would mess with my brain. And I think, David and Richard, I'd love to know if you can tell when actors are doing this, but taping I'd have my then boyfriend, now husband, I still have him do this, record the other lines in the scene in order with a pause between them, and then just go in another room where he wasn't there, no one was there, and I'd tape my phone to the window. I still do this. And when I put the lines next to it in case I'm not off book, and just do it over and over, like, then there was no way I'd be like, okay, never mind, we can just be done. Sorry. Like, it was just me and my boyfriend's recorded voice doing the scene a million times. And I could pretend I was the most confident, most relaxed person because there weren't 3 people in the room I was trying to impress.
Sometimes what I do in auditions is I go, okay, that was really good. That was the audition version of it. Now let's do the documentary version of what you're doing. And when you do that, you kind of let go of doing what you're doing so as to get the job. The character isn't doing what they're doing to get the job. They're just doing what they're doing. So allowing it to have that kind of feel takes away that static that is I hope I get this. I hope you like what I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah. And also thinking about what happened right before the scene and what's happening right after the scene, and that this is a moment in time, because, and particularly this is more germane to actors who are auditioning for relatively smaller roles where, it's not the story of the elevator operator who's taking the lead person up to the 11th floor, but there is something in that moment that, if the writing is good, that is a real moment in time, that it contributes to the authenticity of the story and the fabric of the piece, and to understand that it's that simple moment played, realistically, that is going to be a huge element to the enjoyment of the audience in watching it, and not about playing Lady Macbeth in your 15 seconds.
Right.
Well, I want to remind everyone watching at home that all the episodes of Roar are now available to stream on Apple TV+. I want to thank our panelists so much for joining us and for sharing your craft and your wisdom with your fellow artists. Thank you all so much for being here.